right, welcome back to Pain-Free Day. I'm Dr. Josh Cohen. I'm here with Nate Pantalone. He is with Dobra Tea, Pittsburgh. And we're going to talk about tea today. We're going to find out some good health benefits to tea, why you should drink tea. Is tea better for you than coffee? What can tea do for you? Tea's been around for centuries. I want to say in my research, I was saying it's been around for literally since the, 2000 BC, somewhere around there. I was seeing like some of the first, recordings of tea. It's pretty fascinating. So Nate, how did you get into tea? What brought you into it?
That's a bit of a long story. I hope you'll permit me the time. When I was in college, I started drinking tea because of a friend of mine. He had grown up in a household that had been focused more on tea than, say, coffee. His mother was really into different types of teas, and so he was. My family's more into coffee. My mother and father are both physicians, and they really are all about coffee.
Okay, that's my grandfather was a physician as well, and he was all about coffee. And his saying that I remember from when I was little was "no unadulterated coffee on an empty stomach."
Yeah, I'd say that about tea too. So that's a good mantra to live by. So we started going out for tea to study, and he knew more than I did, so we took his recommendation on where to go. Studying turned into just gossiping and things like that, so we didn't really get anything done after we got caffeinated, but we really liked the tea that we had, and it was a Darjeeling. I don't know what type, but for me that was like a eye-opening experience that I had never had tea that tasted like that. My previous experience had been teabag black tea or Lipton.
Sure, yeah,
that
the
type of
traditional
thing.
stuff that you see in a grocery store.
Exactly. And I'm sure a lot of people have that same experience. They make iced tea at home or that type of thing. Well, that like blew my mind, and I was like, yo, we have to go back there. This is great. I love this stuff. So we started making it a regular thing. We started just gossiping and not really studying, even though we'd bring our books. And finally we said, let's not even try to study. We're going to make this like just hangout time. We'll talk about what's going on. And we found a different different tea room, that had really high quality teas. And we fell in love with one of the teas there. And so we started making that our regular routine. A few years into college later, we were being more frugal, trying to spend less money on tea. And we decided that we would start a blog. Because if you blog about tea, people send it to you for free.
Fair enough.
So that was a pretty great way to go about tasting a lot of different teas. And we started writing about them, and we developed a palate, I guess you could say. And we knew which teas we liked and we didn't like. And it always came back to this local tea room had stuff better than everything we tried. No matter what it was, Darjeeling, Longjing, whatever green tea, or pu'er tea or something, the stuff at this local tea room was just better. And we were a bit surprised and pleasantly surprised, but then we'd have to go spend money that we didn't want to do and buy the tea from them. And that kind of stuck with us. After college, we kept the blog going. We made it more of a podcast because we lived far apart and we wanted to make it a vocal thing. And that worked out pretty well. We never had a huge following, but it was big enough for us. And one day, we're both like upset with our careers and talking, and I said to him, I was like, "Hey, let's start a tea room, like that one in Madison, and because we know about good tea, we know what good tea tastes like. We could talk to them, see if we could get in on their supply or whatever." And he agreed. We decided we were going to do it, and then he got a promotion, a raise, and like transferred, and was like much happier with his new job, and bailed. So I decided to just continue that, and
That's very cool.
so we have a tea room now, and everything's. I mean, there was a lot from that point to the tea room opening, but
Sure.
I'll cut that short.
So now, and you were saying as well, you have a background in chemical engineering?
Yes.
And so did that help you with tea and kind of see, because there's a lot of different like chemical properties to it, different antioxidants, different things like that we'll get into a little bit, but I was just curious if that kind of helped you, help with your perception of tea.
Understanding the chemistry of things does help with understanding perception of tea, but it's more of the that background helped me understand that there are certain chemicals, and to not be afraid of them necessarily either, that do have different influences on your body. And you see that in all types of cooking, and cooking in a lot of ways is chemistry. Making tea has a lot of chemistry involved in it.
Yeah.
Infusion or diffusion, depending on how you want to call it. You have a solvent in the water. You extract water-soluble compounds from the tea. If you brew it with milk, you extract some lipid-soluble compounds. And so,
Oh, that's cool.
And so there's different chemistry with tea, basically. But I wouldn't say my chemical engineering background got me specifically into tea. It just helped with understanding it.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I have a slight background in chemistry, and that helps out as well. Like with going through biochemistry, seeing how different things affect our bodies. And actually, that was one of the things that I really liked about tea. Just reading about and hearing about all the different positive benefits to us. From the antioxidants, polyphenols, catechins, I think they're pronounced. Yeah, different things like that. But then I was reading as well, along those lines that, and I like coffee, but I kind of think that, it's like, I personally think tea's better for you than coffee. More that I've read about, I think there's a lot more health benefits to tea versus coffee. And then I was reading, it was 6 months or a year ago, an article came out though saying like coffee is toxic. There is some type of chemical in there that is cancerous that they were able to kind of pinpoint. And I was like, okay, that makes sense, And so it's like with my practice, I try and if I have somebody who's just drinking 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day, I'm like, oh, that's fine. But if you're drinking a pot a day, that's a little much, and that will start affecting your body in negative ways.
I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but from what I've read about the chemistry of coffee and other things like bread, like breading and fried foods, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. I would imagine it's the roasting process that would create a carcinogenic compound in coffee.
That makes sense.
It could be how roasted a coffee is, might make it carcinogenic or not.
That makes a lot of sense, because then also it's like you look at it when you grill food, the actual act of grilling and charring the food is what makes it, carcinogenic. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
It also adds a lot of flavor.
Yeah.
Do you want to eat boiled food or do you want to eat grilled food?
Right.
Me personally, I'd be willing to risk the cancer, and I'd go for some grilled food every now and then. But having it all the time might not be a good idea.
Even that's what I really preach as well, is that every once in a while that stuff is fine, but you can't do it all the time, And so let's get into some of the health benefits to tea. I know there's a lot of different types. Would you like to kind of talk about that first?
So using sort of Chinese classifications, that's what we go by. There's about 6 major types of tea. All tea comes from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. True tea, comes from the same plant. There are herbal teas. They're tisane, different than true tea. And the leaves, depending on how they're processed and oxidized, sometimes even fermented, change the type of tea. So green tea is the least oxidized. I like to talk about it as a spectrum of oxidation, sort of 0 to 100. And then there's kind of beyond 100 where you get into the fermented regions.
So, and what exactly is oxidation, if you could just explain that just briefly?
Sure. So oxidation is a really common chemical process, and it can be the reaction of oxygen, say in the air, with something. But in chemistry, we define it as oxidation is loss of electrons.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more complicated, but it doesn't always have to be involving oxidation. You can have anaerobic oxidation, which means that it's oxidation without oxygen being present. And that's just because something is transferring electrons to something else.
Okay.
So it's a little complicated to get into, but basically all this oxidation involves air and enzymes in the tea leaves. So when we start with something like green tea, it's going to be closest to the plant in terms of color and everything like that. And green tea is harvested and specifically heated very quickly after it's harvested to denature the enzymes within the tea bush that would facilitate oxidation, internal oxidation of the cells of the tea leaves. Then you have something like oolong tea, which is kind of kneaded and rolled very gently, tossed with itself. The leaves are slightly bruised, and it's left to sit for sometimes several days, to allow like a gentle oxidation process using those enzymes within the tea leaves and air. And it changes the flavor. What it causes is basically a polymerization reaction, which is, polymerization is like plastic. In this way, it's not plastic. It's not actually plastic, but it's like how trees build cellulose, like wood. That's a polymerization reaction. So the tea leaves are basically building these new compounds, which are tannins, out of smaller chemicals in the tea. Those being the polyphenols, like you were mentioning, the antioxidants. So those change, they combine with each other in this oxidation process, in this polymerization, into tannins. And oolongs, you get just a little bit of that. And so it changes the flavor from green tea because those chemicals combine with each other. Then you get to black tea, which has a fully oxidized, and you get a lot of tannin flavor. Tannins are like in grapes, in wine, in black tea. It's that kind of dry taste to it. Woody in a lot of ways. There's a lot of nuances with tannins. They're so complicated. Chemists just don't. There's not like one tannin. There's so many chemists kind of gave up.
That makes sense though, because in a lot of these plants, there's so many different, literally thousands of compounds, and it's very hard to figure out which exact one is giving you this benefit or this negative benefit, and I mean, really, it's like trying to almost picking a needle out of a haystack, to figure out which one is beneficial. And you kind of look at it as like, what they're saying now, which I agree with, is it's generally, a beneficial effect of all of the compounds acting together, in order to create a synergistic effect.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and those do change as you change the type of tea and you change that oxidation. And then kind of after black tea, there's a Chinese type of tea called pu'er tea that is fermented, and it's basically fully oxidized like black tea, and they almost compost the leaves. There's some types of yeast and other microorganisms that grow in the leaves, and that further changes and develops the flavor by breaking down the tannins, by working on other parts of the leaves, and you get these really earthy flavors out of it.
Now, was that pronounced, or is that spelled? Hang on, because I think I have what was it? Puerh?
That's one way to spell it.
Okay.
There's about 3 major ways. Puerh. You sometimes see Pu-er or Pu''er.
Okay, because they were saying, this stuff is great. It's like has strong digestive, antibacterial, and warming properties. This article claims that it cleanses the bloodstream of fat and toxins from meat and fatty foods. Which is pretty interesting if it can help reduce cholesterol and plaque of the arteries. You
see that claim a lot in Chinese medicine, for sure. I don't know how much evidence it has based behind it, but I would be intrigued to read up on that.
And in my practice along those lines, it's like I kind of look at it as if something has been around for thousands of years, there has to be something to it. I have an acupuncturist that works at my practice because the acupuncture goes along very well with the muscle work that I do. And it's like, there has to be something to acupuncture. They've been doing it for thousands of years. People have been benefiting from it, So I kind of figure, it's like with Chinese medicine, whether there's a lot to back it up or not, it can be, generally it's worth investigating a little bit just to see if there's something to it, because, people have been doing it for thousands of years. There has to be something to it. Definitely.
And I think too that it's been demonstrated recently that a lot of fermented foods are really healthy to have.
Correct. Yeah.
And I can't give you a general reason why, but yogurt's good and things like that. Like
I can tell you why. It's because of all the probiotics. It's like the more fermented it is, the more probiotics and good bacteria it'll have. And so that goes into your gut and kind of populates it for a bit. But what they're saying is that it's like once you eat something like that, the bacteria is only in your gut for a day or two, and you have to eat something again to keep it going. You have a natural amount of bacteria in there, but from what we're saying with the tea should help out with that as well, especially the more fermented ones. And actually, it's funny because reading through this, I was seeing that, doing some research, I was seeing that tea is recommended for aiding in digestion, as well, or certain types of teas.
Definitely. Definitely pu'er is one of those. We have a very popular ginger and pu'er mixture that we recommend for digestion, for sure.
Gotcha. So now, do you work with herbs as well?
We do. We do work with herbs. We have a few different herbal blends. I've done a lot of research on proven herbs with proven scientifically studied like evidence behind them, like chamomile, like caraway, like ginger, things like that. And we do have a few different blends that we recommend for sleep or for digestion or for things like that.
Very cool.
Throat issues like buildup of mucus or sore throat, that type of thing.
That's really interesting. And, and along those lines, another thing that I was seeing is that, what was it, green tea, or it might have been green tea that was saying that it has a very strong antiviral effect as well, which I was surprised to see that. That was pretty cool.
I think that's been, a lot of the green tea evidence has been shown in vitro as opposed to in vivo.
Okay.
That basically in the laboratory in like a petri dish versus in biological, like a human or something like that. But I don't know how much has been studied in humans.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of that stuff there's a lot of antioxidants in tea that have a lot of evidence in vitro but not in vivo.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, actually, can you explain a little bit about antioxidants and what they do? And, 'cause there are a lot of antioxidants in tea.
There are. So antioxidants, that's a very general category of chemical. And in tea, a lot of them are called catechins. There's a few different catechins in tea. There's about 4 major ones. And the most predominant one, the one that has the most evidence behind it, is called epigallocatechin gallate, or EGCG to make it easier. And that has a lot of scientific evidence behind it, especially in vitro, as having anti-cancer properties, very strong antioxidant properties. It also has some in vivo evidence where it can facilitate the pharmacokinetics of cancer drugs. That means it helps cancer drugs do their work.
Helps them be more effective.
Exactly. It also is shown to increase the bioavailability of certain blood pressure medications. By itself, it doesn't do as much as in conjunction with other things. But it's so intriguing that scientists are studying it strongly to see how they can make it work with other things, because it's a natural compound, because it's found in tea. Like, you can have a cup of tea and drink that and get some small benefits from it. But unfortunately, I think it's more lipid soluble than it is water soluble, even though you do get some from tea.
Okay. So then if you brew the tea with milk, you get more antioxidants out of it? Is that?
It depends. So bioavailability is really complicated when it comes to antioxidants, or when it comes to tea. Really in general, bioavailability is complicated. Your body has different ways of getting things from food, and one of those is the bile pathway in your gut, where I can't remember, liver or gallbladder, maybe you could help me with that, sends bile to your gut, and then
Your gallbladder.
Your gallbladder.
I believe it is.
Right, and that extracts a lot of lipid-soluble compounds from your GI tract and can take them back into your body. But when you extract tea, when you brew it with water, you don't get all those. You're basically infusing all of the water-soluble things in tea. You're not getting the lipid-soluble things. If you brew it with milk, you can get those. There's milk fat in milk, especially whole milk, of course. There's also proteins in milk. I think casein proteins are the proteins in milk, and they can kind of surround and bind different things, water-soluble things, or things that are partially water-soluble, partially lipid-soluble. And you can get those more. How much is then available to your body after they're bound with the milk? It's not studied very well, but it has been shown to increase it.
That makes sense, because I'm seeing it in the weightlifting world with protein absorption. With people are trying to eat a ton of protein, and there's only so much protein you can absorb at one sitting. And our bodies are only made to absorb a certain amount, and it's like if you take in more than that, generally just kind of your body either tries to excrete it or tries to stores it. you know. So, hey, I think we need to take a break for a minute. We're here with Nate Pantalone from Dobra, Pittsburgh. Welcome back. It's Pain-Free Life. I'm Dr. Josh Cohen. We're here with Nate Pantalone from Dobra Tea, Pittsburgh. And you can reach him at www.dobrateapgh.com. So we were talking about different types of tea. So we're going to continue that conversation. Right now we are drinking. Nate was nice enough to give us some yellow tea. So it's kind of curious as to what is yellow tea. So he's going to
All right. So yellow tea is it's a uniquely processed tea. It's only made in China right now. And from my understanding, the processing was a bit of a mistake in its discovery, and this was a very long time ago. That the legend goes, as I've heard it, is that tea manufacturer was making tea, had an emergency, wasn't finished with his tea leaves, and threw a tarp over them or something to cover them after he had heated them in that first step of green tea processing. So the enzymes that oxidize it were denatured, but the leaves are still wet. And he threw a tarp over his whole big batch of tea and went away for a few days, came back, and finished the tea. But by that point, a very small amount of oxidation had occurred because the tea leaves were still wet. And the water facilitated a little bit of natural oxidation from the air. And it changed the color from green to yellow because the chlorophyll had oxidized in the leaves. So there was no longer that green color that you get from the chlorophyll. But he loved the taste, and later, when he was making it and continuing to make the tea leaves that way, the emperor found out it was his favorite tea as well, and named it like a imperial tea. Those emperors at the time also went by yellow emperors, so it was a little bit of a coincidence. And so this type of yellow tea is both like an imperial yellow tea because that was the emperor's color at the time, and it's also yellow tea because of the color of the leaves, because of that slight late oxidation process.
So would this be in between like a green tea and a black tea, or a green tea and a oolong tea?
Yes, so it would be, I'd say, between green and oolong. It's just past green tea, and maybe not quite at the oolong level. It still has a lot of yellow color to it. That oolongs can tend to have a yellow color, but they can also be a little bit amber sometimes too, depending.
Gotcha. So you were saying there were a couple other teas that you didn't have a chance to talk about. If you'd like to mention those as well.
Sure. So yellow tea was one of those, and it's just past green tea. White tea is another one, and white tea is basically just dried in the shade usually, or partial sun, and that photo bleaches the leaves. It gives them their white color, and because the buds are so young, they don't have a lot of chlorophyll anyway. It's usually just buds in white tea, not any big leaves. And so you see in types of white tea, they're called silver a lot of the times, or white, or they're referred to as different flower colors like peony or things like that. And there are slightly oxidized because they're not heated ever, but they're more of I'd say a naturally processed tea, just basically dried in the shade.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what is matcha? I've read a little bit about that. How does that fit in with all the types of teas?
That's a good question. Matcha is a type of green tea from Japan. They take a tencha, which is a type of Japanese leaf, and they grind it very finely with usually stone grinders, something like granite. That is then prepared in a bowl, usually a small amount, maybe about the size of 2 almonds or about a teaspoon or so. In a bowl is whisked with hot water. So you actually, when you consume that, you're consuming the powdered leaf that's been then reinfused with water. You hear a lot of people, Dr. Oz or whoever these days, talk about the health benefits of matcha especially, or even a few years ago. It is probably a healthier tea than most others, not only because it's green tea, it has a lot of those antioxidants, but because you're also consuming the whole leaf. It's not just an infusion. You're actually drinking the powdered leaf.
Ideally, you're getting more antioxidants, more benefits, more positive benefits, more things like that.
Right, exactly. And it's because it's powdered, it's also really available to your body. It's not like eating a salad. It's, it would be like eating powdered spinach or something like that, and your body would be able to handle it a lot better.
You can absorb it a lot better.
Right, exactly.
Like we're saying, bioavailability.
Right, but it's because of that, it's also, you need to take it very carefully because it's high in caffeine, like a lot of teas are. All that caffeine's available too. If you have it on an empty stomach, like your grandfather was talking about coffee, it can wreck your stomach. It can cause nausea or vomiting.
Well, I would assume as well, if there's, if it's their leaves, there's a lot of fiber in there, so it could affect people, make them go to the bathroom or things like that as well.
I don't know how much the fiber affects because of how small you usually dose the matcha.
Okay.
But yeah, there could be. You are.
Yeah, but and also along those lines, you mentioned Dr. Oz, and I like Dr. Oz, but I don't like how certain things are put out to the public, saying, hey, this is a magic bullet. This will take care of everything. And there is no magic bullet. Right. There really isn't one. And what we're talking about with tea, this is something that'll help aid. It's a supplement to health, to help keep you feeling healthy. Like you're saying, it'll help other medications and other things be more effective, but there's no magic bullet,
Exactly. And that's, I think, a really important takeaway for everyone. If you're listening to this, the most important thing to take away is tea. There's been a lot of evidence to show that tea is healthy, or tea is part of a healthy lifestyle, but it's not a magic bullet, like you said. It's really, it works well in conjunction with other things, but it's not going to cure your cancer. It's not going to.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I look at vitamins like that, because you get a lot of people that will say, oh, if I take a vitamin, I don't have to eat healthy. It's like, no, this is meant to be, it's a diet designed as a supplement to a healthy lifestyle. It's supposed to supplement it, it's supposed to help you be healthier, but you still need to watch what you eat, exercise, stuff like that, and this will fit in very well with it, but doesn't replace healthy eating. If you have green tea along with like a big bucket of fried chicken, it's it's still not going to, fried chicken's still going to affect you a lot.
yeah, for sure.
So now, a couple other things that we were talking about. You were saying that that scientists are studying tea a lot more now and trying to figure out the positive benefits, the bioavailability. One of the things that you said that I thought was very interesting is that they're talking about altering antioxidants. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of focused research on tea, and particularly those antioxidants in green tea that we mentioned earlier. EGCG has been the one that's been mainly focused on because of it has the most benefits demonstrated in vitro. And there's been some work on making it more bioavailable to your body. Your body has a lot of trouble absorbing it. The different antioxidants have different rates of absorption.
That makes sense.
They're anywhere from 0.1%, which is nothing, to 31%, and so it's all over the place. It depends on what your diet is with the tea. It depends on your own gut bacteria.
So let's just touch on that for 1 second, because I so agree with that. If you have a very unhealthy diet, your gut's going to be inflamed. You're not going to be absorbing all of these antioxidants or all the positive nutrients that you need, and actually you can even be nutrient deficient because you're not absorbing enough.
Right.
So I just wanted to interject that.
Right. It's a very complicated subject because there's a lot of factors that go into how your body absorbs things, and there's not one magic bullet. It's like an orchestra of things that you need to do.
And one person's going to absorb it a little differently than the next person, then the next person, then the next person,
Exactly. There's a genetic type to it as well. A lot of factors. And so they're studying how to make it more bioavailable for everybody. One of the things they're doing is peracetylating the EGCG, which means they're reacting it with acetic acid. And that makes it more water soluble, and it makes it more available to your body. And there's been some evidence shown that this peracetylated EGCG is really, really strongly helpful in conjunction with certain types of cancer drugs. The last thing I heard was it might be useful with a breast cancer medication. It also might help with making a certain blood pressure medication more bioavailable. There's a lot of really intriguing and hopeful evidence out there about these tea antioxidants.
That makes sense, but along the lines with what we're talking about with bioavailability, you take a cup of good green tea or yellow tea or black tea, throw a whole bunch of sugar in it, it's going to affect the bioavailability of it.
Definitely.
And I think one of the good things about tea is that it's not sweet. It's very, it is mild. It's not this huge like punch in the face, and it's easier on your body. I feel better after I drink a cup of tea,
Me too. I do too. I think if anybody wants to make tea a little bit more bioavailable, there's been some evidence that vitamin C can really increase the bioavailability of tea.
Okay.
So something like citrus, say lemon, might be a nice thing to add with tea to help with absorption.
Along those lines, it was really fascinating. I was reading that Chinese seamen in the Chinese people who worked on ships, they were given green tea to help prevent scurvy. Back in the 1500s. I thought that was pretty interesting.
There is actually a little bit of vitamin C in tea, but it's not, say, as much as limes or other things like that, right?
Okay.
But yeah, there is a little bit of vitamin C in tea as well.
That's still pretty cool.
Especially green tea, of course.
So have you traveled around and gone to different tea places and how did you kind of experiment with tea and find the right brand, or not brands, but I guess types that you like?
So I have traveled a lot, not just to Asia, but to Africa and other places.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things that we really focus on is now especially trying to find tea directly from farmers, but also tea that has very little pesticides. There's a lot of pesticides used in the tea industry, and the United States is very bad at regulating the amount of pesticides used on tea leaves compared to, say, the European Union. They have very strict regulations in the European Union. We follow those at a minimum. We don't want our customers to drink tea covered in pesticides.
Yeah.
So we, at a minimum, follow those European Union standards. And then a lot of our teas now are certified organic. And they're certified organic all over the world, not just in the United States, but they would be, that certification would be mirrored in Japan by the Japanese Association, or in Europe by the EU certified organic. So we really care a lot about getting people a high quality tea that's also not going to be covered in pesticides.
That makes sense. I read a lot about that just in the agriculture industry, Roundup, things like that. Even trace amounts of Roundup can affect us in very negative ways. And it's not surprising here that the U.S. isn't very good at monitoring that because we use so many pesticides here,
Right, exactly.
And from what I've read, tea is it's taken much more seriously in Europe and in Asia. Than what it is here. Coffee's taken very seriously here, but it's I don't think tea gets the respect that coffee does, or tea gets the respect that it should. Let's put it that way.
That is interesting, and it's funny how that, I don't know exactly how that happened, but back in the 1700s, of course, we drank a lot of tea. You hear about the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
And the British drank a lot of tea, but I don't know when. Maybe a historian, you could have a historian on here sometime talk about that, but when did that change in America? When did we go from tea to coffee? Was it the culture of moving out west? Was it the cowboys, or
You always read about cowboy coffee and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. So. Maybe coffee was a little easier to make on the trail than tea. Who knows?
Yeah. Maybe.
But yeah, it's pretty interesting to see that, and how the differences between the two. Let me see. So, was there a lot? How did you find tea in Africa? Was that a point of going to Africa?
So that wasn't the point of going to Africa. I went a few times. Once with my father because he was volunteering his time as a physician at a hospital.
Nice.
Another time I went to visit him again in South Africa that time, and it was a secondary point of my trip to learn more about rooibos when I was there, learn more about the rooibos tisane, the rooibos herbal tea. Unfortunately, there's only one very small area in South Africa where it was grown, and I was not there when I was there, so I was not able to learn about rooibos. Most South Africans actually don't drink it.
Okay.
It's exported mostly to Germany.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they were like, you should go to Germany and ask them.
Why Germany?
I don't know. I guess the Germans really love rooibos.
Funny. What exactly is rooibos?
So rooibos is a plant native to South Africa, if I remember correctly. It's a small bush with sort of needle-like leaves, and those leaves are oxidized and in a way similar to black tea, and you get that red rooibos. There is actually green rooibos that's unoxidized. It's treated more like green tea, but the red rooibos is the most popular, and it has that almost black tea flavor, but different, but yeah, it has that rich flavor to it as well.
Gotcha.
It has very different compounds in it than tea. I'm told it has a lot of antioxidants as well. I don't know that much about them, but it has no caffeine too. So if you want to drink something without caffeine, rooibos is pretty great for that.
That's what's just pretty nice to have something at night that you can drink without any caffeine to help you go to sleep.
Definitely.
And where did you go? Where did you go in Asia? Was that more for going to tea houses or?
Yes, yeah. All my travels in Asia so far have been for tea. So I've been to Sri Lanka, and I've been to the Republic of China, Taiwan, to learn about tea there. I learned about oolong tea, green tea, and black tea. So,
really cool. I was in China once, and I was amazed at all the different types of teas that they had, how specialized it got, how expensive it would get. I mean, we went to one tea house and sat and had, traditional tea. It was a really cool experience.
Yeah, the Chinese traditional tea is very cool, very romantic too, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. You have to be very careful in China. If you don't know about tea, there's a lot of different people that'll take advantage of your ignorance. So
Sure.
it's you have to be careful, and I would be very careful about spending a lot of money on tea as well too. You can find, in my experience, you can find a lot of really high quality teas for a reasonable price in China or wherever, Sri Lanka.
That makes sense. It's kind of like wine, where it's like, if you know a little bit about what you're doing, you can find very good wine for, $10 or $20.
Right.
That makes sense. So, and I mean, what types of teas did you try there? Did you bring any back with you, or?
Oh, each trip we brought tons back. We actually just got back from Sri Lanka about a month ago, and we brought back probably a dozen or more different black teas from there, from different regions, different grades. Sri Lankan tea is very much about the grade of the tea, like the size of the leaf when they're done drying it, and whether it's from the bud or from like a lower leaf on the stalk when they pluck it. But it's mostly all black tea in Sri Lanka. They make a very small amount of green tea, they make a very small amount of white tea, but it's primarily black tea.
Does that taste different than the black tea you get from China?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there is a terroir to tea, so you get very different flavors. Ceylon tea has a likeness to a lot of breakfast teas, if people are familiar with those. It has a very classic taste to it. I don't really know how to describe that taste. Sometimes it can be a little bit citrusy by itself without adding lemon or whatever. And it's usually not very bitter, which is nice, especially if you want to make a strong cup of breakfast tea or something. You might not have to add a lot of sugar or milk to it. Although in Sri Lanka they do. They will add a lot of sugar or milk to it. So.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, it sounds like it was probably a fun trip fun to do some research like that,
Yeah, it was. We traveled all over the place. One of the most fun things there was we went to 2 different parts of the rainforest, and we met with 2 producers there who we'll be working with in the future that are trying to do forest-friendly tea in Sri Lanka. And pretty much everybody outside of these 2 producers we met with doesn't care at all. And they are about the big tea industry, lots of pesticides, that type of stuff. And these guys that we met they want to go organic, they want to go forest friendly, they want to do like farm to table type stuff. And so that's what we're about too. Like we want to bring low pesticide teas to our customers. We want to go forest friendly because deforestation has huge implications, not only in the future, but like for the land right now. So
both of us have kids, and we want to make sure that we leave the world in a decent place a decent position for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about how it's in Sri Lanka, Thailand, places like that a lot of the forests are being taken away for like farming, for just different things like that. And
right.
I feel the same way that you do. If you can harvest it without harming anything, that's the way to go. And I would assume that you kind of have to go and travel there to find people to do that. All right, we're going to take another break here. I'm here with Nate Pantalone from Dobra Tea in Pittsburgh. We'll talk to you. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Pain Free Day. I'm Dr. Joshua Cohen. I'm here with Nate Pantalone from Dobra Tea, Pittsburgh, and we're talking about tea. So let's get back into it. Nate, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is if somebody's interested in getting into tea and starting to drink tea, where's a good place for them to start? How do they start? What do they look for?
That's a great question. And my follow-up question to that would to the customer or whoever's interested in getting into tea. What's your experience? Think about your experience with tea. Did you start with Lipton iced tea? What do you like? Do you like black tea? Do you like green tea? And maybe go from there, step off from there. Or if you're a coffee drinker, there's another way we'll come back to toward the end. So if you like green tea and you want to explore green teas, there's lots of different green teas out there. My personal experience with green tea was only Chinese. So when I tried Japanese green teas, they blew my mind. I never had tea like that before. They're so different from Chinese green teas because they're steamed. So that might be an intriguing and interesting thing to try out. If you like black tea and you've only had, say, Lipton or a tea bag like English breakfast, there's lots of really interesting teas like Darjeeling out of India that are more mild on the black tea and more fruity because they're a different leaf. They're grown in a different climate. They're grown really high elevation, and they don't really need milk or sugar as well because they don't have the strong flavor like breakfast teas can.
Is Earl Grey? Would Earl Grey be like that?
Earl Grey is usually a large leaf, but it's mixed with bergamot extract or oil, and that gives it that sort of zesty citrus flavor, right, from the bergamot orange. So it just depends on you. That's a great one to get into if you like Earl Grey. I started kind of with Earl Grey as well. Great with milk and sugar too if you like that. But yeah, that's more on the aromatized side, black tea side.
That's what I started with Earl Grey. My father used to drink Earl Grey. He would have that in the morning and have coffee in the afternoon. And, so I started drinking Earl Grey. And, it was good, but it's like there's so many other kinds out there. Once I started trying different kinds, I was like, wow, this is, Earl Grey's good, but there's a whole lot else out there.
If you like Earl Grey, there's lots of other aromatized teas. In China, they make teas with plum or lychee or vanilla. There's tea that's smoked as well, like Lapsang Souchong, that has like a really smoky taste. It can be like drinking a campfire. So if you like smoky things, if you like barbecue, that could be a great one to get into. It just really depends. And if you've never tried oolong tea, I would suggest giving that a try. Oolong has such a large spectrum of flavors, and there's some that are closer to black tea and some that are closer to green tea because of that spectrum, that it's a really interesting thing to branch off into. And oolongs are a great place to start because there's really only high quality oolongs out there. There's not a lot of low quality oolongs out on the market right now. It's mostly black tea or green tea. Because oolongs are really only processed in like 2 different places in the world, in Fujian, China, and in Taiwan. And they have very long tea culture and tradition, and they stick to that. They don't really do many other types of tea. But if you're a coffee drinker and you want to get into tea, like my dad, who's still just a coffee drinker, things like chai or strong black teas like that are really great. My dad drinks only black coffee, and when he comes in to visit, he always forgets what he's had, and he always picks the same thing again when he comes in.
That's really funny.
Which is our masala chai, and it's a really strong Indian black tea, Assam. It's brewed with milk and sugar and a lot of spices like ginger, cinnamon, fennel, clove, orange peel. And we brew it with the milk, so you get a different extraction than brewing it with just water. But he loves that. It's got a really strong, intense flavor. The spices add a lot of overtones to it as well, a lot of complexity to it. Things like chai could be a great way to start too. We have a lot of customers that start with chai, and then they branch off from there. Some just stick with chai too. So it's but like real traditional Indian chai is a great way to get into tea, and I would suggest though reducing the amount of sugar you put in there for sure.
Gotcha.
You can make chai with alternate milks too if you don't want dairy. It's great with oat milk. It's great with soy milk. I would stay away from almond and coconut. They can give the tea an extra bitter flavor. Okay. But soy and oat milk work pretty well.
Do you sell or have you worked with yerba mate?
Yeah, yerba mate. We serve a lot of that. We actually serve it traditionally in a gourd, but you can make it lots of other ways. The traditional way is to fill up a gourd almost halfway or a third of the way full with the leaves, and you can brew it with either cold water, hot water, whatever. It's actually a type of holly. It's not a tea, but it does have caffeine. It naturally has caffeine. There's 2 or 3 types of holly that naturally have caffeine. Another one closely related to yerba mate is guayusa, which is another interesting one to drink. Yerba mate is pretty bitter, pretty medicinal tasting.
I've tried it. I have a buddy that went to South America and brought it back. He's like, here, you have to try this. He's like, once you get used to it, it's great. And I drank it a couple times. I'm like, I just can't get used to it.
Yeah, that medicinal taste is really, really difficult for a lot of people to get used to. But if you want something that's not true tea and you want something that's like mate, guayusa is another great way to get into it. It doesn't have the bitterness and the medicinal taste that mate has. I would say it's more of like a grassy, like green banana overtones, and sometimes a little bit of chocolate, like a mildly roasted chocolate. So it's a really, mate and guayusa are really weird and interesting.
It sounds like it. It's a little bit of a different subject, but I'm just kind of curious, you have children, I have children as well. Mine are a little older than yours, but throughout the years I've given them some tea that has been, like non-caffeinated or green tea or different things like that. Do you think that's okay? How young is it for, is it okay for kids to drink it when they're younger? Obviously you don't want to give it to a very young child, or a toddler or an infant, but I was just kind of curious about that.
So I've read a little bit about this. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I know there's evidence that giving children caffeine is not good for their brain development, and there's other herbs that are also not recommended for children. So I would definitely be careful with that. And if you want to give herbs to your children, I'd give them only small amounts and not large amounts because their bodies are small. They handle things differently. I have read a little bit about chamomile in children and that can help them with relaxation and sleep. But again, it's a lot, right? It's like chamomile is kind of intense for children, but dill was often prescribed for I think it was colic or like teething, and dill is supposed to be an interesting herb to help children as well. Like pickles, like giving children pickles to chew on was dill pickles specifically was a way.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I was also reading as well that mint tea is very good for digestion, and I want to say they even said for headaches it helps out, but I'm not positive about that.
Mint would be a great one for children. There's a lot of herbs like that are generally recognized as safe, and those would be great to try for children. Something like rooibos could be great, like we were talking about earlier. Something low in or no caffeine in case of rooibos, but rooibos has antioxidants in it. Mint, ginger has a lot is used in a lot of cuisine. I think ginger would be safe. Maybe turmeric, that type of thing. Yeah.
That makes sense. I've always felt more like I wouldn't give my kids any coffee. Just I don't agree with that. But it's like the tea, and especially low caffeine or no caffeine tea. It's like it's a nice alternative for the kids, and they can drink it. They can feel like an adult. And it's like I really like that. It's like we'll be traveling somewhere, and the kids, my wife and I will want to stop and get a cup of coffee or or whatever, and the kids want something as well. We're like, well, you can have this. This will some tea. It's something a little different than water, and but it's like it doesn't have the caffeine in it. And anybody that has kids, you don't want to give your kids caffeine. It's like I've had this argument with my kids over and over again where I'm like, it's like they want to have a Pepsi at 8 o'clock at night. I'm like, no, I mean, I make sodas as a treat for them. They really can't have it all the time, but it's like certainly at night, no. No.
Yeah, and all that sugar too will crush you. And the nice thing if you make your own tea is you can adjust the amount of sugar you put in there, or no sugar even. Actually, another herb that came to mind while we were talking about sugar is hibiscus is great as well.
I've heard of that. I don't know much about it.
Hibiscus has a naturally sweet flavor, and children love it in my experience. And it can have a brilliant color. There's some hibiscus that's purple, some that has a red color or orange. Some are in between, and so they end up with this brilliant ruby color. And of course, children love visual things, and so it's bright red tea is really eye-catching and enticing for them. And because it's naturally sweet, a little bit tart, it kind of hits that like sweet they're looking for, that sweet spot they're looking for, and could be a great alternative to Pepsi, for instance. So
That's great. That's, along those lines, I know that, kombucha, it's, fermented tea. And, like, I kind of find that that's a nice alternative to sip on throughout the day, as opposed to like a soda or something like that. Have you done any work with kombucha? Have you,
Kombucha has been on my list to experiment with for a long time. I used to brew my own beer a lot, so that was...
Oh, along the same lines.
Right, exactly, yeah. But there is a little added sugar in kombucha. You have to add it for the yeast and things for the mother to grow. But it is definitely a great alternative because you can, if you make it yourself or you buy it, it's going to have less sugar than soda or something. And it has that nice carbonation. It has a little bit of acetic acid in it, so it has that zest, that zing to it. And
I was brewing it for a little bit. I drink it almost every day. It's just I ran out of time to brew it. But one of the things that I found fascinating is in the history of it. They say that people were brewing it for literally hundreds of years because it was a way to kind of clean water. So that you can drink water. And that same thing with low alcohol beer. I was reading as well. They ferment it and and brew beer so that the water would be safe to drink.
Definitely, and that's one of the interesting parts of the history of tea and other cultures, not just beer, but when you would make tea a long time ago, you'd heat the water because it gave you a better infusion of the leaves. You're inadvertently pasteurizing the water at the same time. And so whether they knew it or not, they were making the water healthy to consume. And one of the oldest stories about tea brewing tradition and culture was that they would make soup out of the tea. We were talking about pu'er earlier. One of the older histories or kind of legends of pu'er was that it was used in making soup with like onions and other things, probably green onions if we're talking Chinese cuisine, that they would break a chunk off of like this compacted tea and make it into soup. And the reason they compacted it when they made it, and this led to that fermentation in pu'er, was because it was easier to sell and transport on pack animals. Gotcha. And when the tea sat on the pack animals, it would get sweat from them. It would get natural yeast in their fur, and that would aid the fermentation. And so
that's pretty cool.
That's part of one of the reasons why it's fermented. But then when you break it up, and you have to boil it in water to get it to break up again, to get it to dissolve. So it was kind of part of the naturally fed from that tradition and the way that
that's a really cool
process. So
that and it makes sense too in that with making soup you're going to use a type of stock usually for the most part to flavor it a little bit, and so instead of that you can use tea, which ideally will have like if we were to do it now, chances are it would have less sodium in it, less nitrates, and be healthier for you.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. So now, do you take? Well, let me ask you this: how much tea do you drink a day?
I tend to drink a lot. If I'm in the tea room, I drink probably more than I should, and I've been trying to cut back a little bit just so I can have a few days without caffeine, so that I can sleep a little better at night. That makes sense.
I've been reading more about that, about like, every once in a while taking like a week off from caffeine, from all that stuff, to just to let you, they call them your neurotransmitters, let your neurotransmitters calm down, let your neurological system calm down a little bit.
I think it's related to ATP sensitivity or something, something like that.
That's producing energy and but then also I even look at it as like, stress in the body and.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. And tea has, especially green tea, has a lot of anti-anxiety properties to it, but caffeine also increases anxiety. So you right. You have this kind of double-edged sword there with are you drinking tea to calm down or to wake up? And it has both of those properties. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think for most people, it's like it'd be accurate to drink, 1 or 2 cups of caffeinated tea a day. They probably wouldn't want to drink a whole lot more than that unless they got used to it first.
Right. I would say probably no more than 6. Usually, when you prepare tea, you use less, say by weight, leaves than you would use grounds for coffee. So when people prepare coffee, it tends to be stronger, more caffeinated because there's more weight. In the grounds. With tea leaves, you tend to use less weight, less caffeine. But if you make strong tea, you might get more caffeine out of there. So I would say maybe 6 cups of tea per day would be like a good upper limit. But it depends on your caffeine tolerance and other things like that. How strong you're preparing your tea, that type of thing.
So now, what would have more caffeine between a cup of coffee and a cup of tea? Prepared the same way, or?
I'm almost certain it would be coffee. like, because you tend to use more grounds by weight. I don't know which has more natural content by weight if you were to take the dry leaves and the dry grounds. I'm sure it'd be kind of close. But definitely, you can get a lot of caffeine out of tea depending on how you make it. Depending on, there's different varieties of tea that have different levels of caffeine. Tea has a huge amount of genetic variety in the species. And so you have some tea that's very low in caffeine naturally, and some that's also very high in caffeine naturally. And it really depends on which tea you're drinking.
That's just fun. Along those lines, I teach in upstate New York, so it's about a 5-hour drive. And in the past, I would make myself a big thermos of black tea. And I found that it's like if I drank the whole thing by the end of the drive, I was kind of jittery and I'd have trouble falling asleep afterwards. Yeah. So I was like, that might be a little too much. Let me try like some green tea for it or something. Yes, it's nice to have something to sip on besides water, you know? So now, do you watch what you eat? Do you take care of yourself? Along the lines of like drinking tea and being healthy. Do you take care of yourself? Do you watch what you eat?
I do. I have a problem with binge eating that I grew up having, living in a house with mostly snacks and that type of stuff. And so I've been trying to work on that for more than 10 years now, and I try to eat healthy. Like I like to make myself a lot of stir fry or things like that. It's easy to mix in a lot of vegetables with rice, with a little bit of protein, and it's easy to make a lot of for me and have leftovers. And that way I don't have to worry about preparing something really nice every night. I can make a whole bunch and then portion it out, meal prep for the week or whatever.
That makes sense.
And I do try to drink tea. Not every day now, like I said, I take about 3 days a week off from caffeine, but I drink tea the other 4 days. I like to drink a lot of green tea, and right now a lot of black tea because of our trip to Sri Lanka.
Fair enough. Still fresh in your mind.
Yeah, and the tea there is great. The black tea there is excellent. So.
That's awesome. Now, has traveling to Asia influenced how you cook, or how you eat at all?
A little bit. I'm still not an expert on curry or that style of food preparation in India. It's really complicated. There's so many layers to the spices and things like that. But when I was in Taiwan, the Asian cooking kind of clicked, having like tasted all these different foods. Every meal we had there was 13 dishes or more, big round table, lazy Susan, and you're eating all this fresh fish and fresh vegetables, and I mean, it was a culinary experience aside from the tea experience. So, but that style of cooking clicked with me while I was there, and I've learned better how to prepare those cuisines since going there. So awesome. I feel like I'm getting a handle on cooking Chinese right now.
That's pretty nice. It's hard to do. I love cooking. I do a lot of work. I do a lot of cooking. I always think we're better off if we can cook a little bit. We're going to be able to eat healthier. It's going to be less expensive. And it's kind of cool to travel these different places and get these different influences. And it's, I mean, like I said, when I traveled to China, it's like I was so influenced by the tea culture there. It was really cool. And but then also even just the little snacks that you had, they were a little different than what you associate with like coffee shops. It's like coffee shops you associate with just pastries and things like that. Maybe there's a sandwich, but it's like in the tea houses, it's like there are these very small, very tasty little almost like appetizer type things.
Right, exactly. And there's places where you might get maybe not a full meal, but like a steamed bun in China that has a little vegetable mixture in there, and it's a steamed dough, or sometimes they have meat ones. And I mean the culinary traditions are the traditions in China, not just tea, but for food in India as well, are extraordinary and so deep, so detailed.
Yeah, it's been going on for so long.
And especially in China, they also care about textures a lot. So mouthfeel of things. You notice that in teas, not as much, but they like chewy a lot there, which for Westerners can be really strange.
Yeah, a little offsetting. I would think if you're drinking something and it's chewy.
Well, not necessarily drinking, but like eating, say like tendons or like squid or like that type of thing. It can be strange to not be used to that.
Sure. Yeah, different. That makes sense.
But
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our conversation with Nate Pantalone from Dobra Tea. Please check him out at www.dobrateapgh.com. This is a great place. Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I appreciate it. Hopefully you've all learned something, and thank you for your time, Nate.
Thank you, Josh.
Have a pain-free day.